Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of books that I would describe as more than just tropes. A conversation point that many of us have partaken in for the last couple of years is the idea of trope marketing, and we've all seen those shots where there will be a picture of a book's cover and then surrounding the book are various different tropes or trendy things that are present within the book. For example, enemies to lovers, only one bed, hero's journey. Obviously none of those things are bad necessarily, and any trope is capable of being exceptionally well done or very poorly done. A cliche is when something is done in a way that we've all seen before. It's not really doing anything new or interesting, whereas a trope is just the vehicle through which we are able to try and do something that we've seen before. It's how we identify something that is familiar to us. So it's not necessarily good or bad, it just depends on the execution. That said, I do find myself continuously, whether I like something or not, appreciating when books are very, very unique, when they're doing something different, when they're genre blenders, or when they have a plot that you really don't know how to describe, you don't know how to put it plainly, and you don't know how to just describe it as tropes. Today's list of books are ones that I think I don't always know how to describe these succinctly. I feel like trying to give a description, even if I can give you a synopsis or a general overview, I don't feel like it actually does enough. And I wanted to go through these kinds of books because they're not always the easiest to market, they're not always the easiest to talk about, but all of these I think are going to work for a variety of different people. Before I jump into my recommendations, I would love to know one of two different things, or you can answer both of these. What's a book that you feel like was incredibly tropey, yet did those tropes so well? And then what's a book that you feel like you have no idea ever how to describe it to people and you just find yourself saying like, trust me, it's really good? I would love to know the answer to both of those questions because as always, I like seeing your recommendations and trying to check out books that all of you really, really enjoy. And on that note, let's go ahead and segue into the list of books. The first one I do think is relatively underhyped, and other books by this author as of late have been really, really well received and really praised and have sold quite well. So I have a hope that this book in particular will start to have a reinvigorated fan base, and that would be Race the Sands. This is by Sarah Beth Durst. The book that you might be the most familiar with from this author would be The Spell Shop, and recently there has been a new cozy fantasy within this world as well, called The Enchanted Greenhouse. And it's interesting because these are the first ones by this author that have been more cozy centered, whereas the rest of Sarah Beth Durst's works have been quite different, and Race the Sands is no exception to that. And this is a story I continuously, even when I describe it, I think, that doesn't sound that good. And in the past, when I read the synopsis, because I've read other things by Sarah Beth Durst, and I thought, I want to check out more by this author. And when I saw the synopsis for this one, I kept seeing people say this is really good, and also this is a really good standalone fantasy story. And then I read the synopsis, and I'm like, it just doesn't sound like it's that interesting. And then I read it, and I thought, that was really good. And it kept getting better and better the more it went. When it first started, I was like, okay, this is all right. And then it built and built and built. And by the end, I was like, wow, that was a really good book. So the setup for the story is that you follow this woman who cares very, very deeply about her daughter. However, she has fallen on tough times. She doesn't have a lot of money, and she's really, really worried about her daughter being taken away from her. And as such, she finds herself desperate to do basically any job that she is even somewhat qualified for, so long as it means that she has the money to continue to be her daughter's guardian. And one day, that has kind of shattered. That whole hope of hers has been taken away, and she knows if she doesn't do something that everything is going to fall apart and she's going to lose the only family that she has. And so in the story you see somebody that is desperate, who's a mother who wants to do whatever she can, and she previously used to be pretty well regarded as somebody who participated in these races of these beings known as Kihawks. Kihawks in their society are individuals who have been living horrible lives, and when they died, they are reincarnated as these beasts known as Kihawks, and people race these beasts, sometimes even to the death. And we see that this individual had some part in some of the races in the past, but she's kind of fallen from grace. And she gets kind of sucked back into it when she finds another young person who is desperate to get away from her family and will do anything she can to get out on her own 2 feet. She just needs a little bit of help. And so these two pair together, and the mother character is like, I'm going to be your coach, and then this other character is going to race Keyhawks. And it sounds fine. Maybe you heard that description already, you think that sounds great. But I know for me, I was like, so it's a racing book? I don't know. This doesn't really sound like my cup of tea. But this ends up getting into the religion of their world and the magic of their world and the politics, and it goes all the way to the top, to put it in a really cheesy way. And it is remarkable the way that these two unassuming individuals end up playing such a big role in something that impacts kind of their entire country in a way that you wouldn't expect. But continuously, I find that I don't really know quite how to describe this book in a way that fits the trope marketing mold. And it's not that I want to, or that that's my aim, but in talking about books, of course, I want to ensure that I am relaying to all of you an accurate representation of what the book has to offer. And I just always continuously find myself thinking, I don't think I'm doing a good job when I talk about this book. I don't feel like I'm really accurately describing it as far as the impact it has, or the way that the story builds, or the way that the character relationships play out. I never feel like I'm doing a good enough job. But I think that speaks to just how much the book is not concerned with fitting into some kind of trend or being super tropey in the way that we've come to find a lot of books are. It's not concerned with that. It just was concerned with telling an interesting and fun story, and I'm so appreciative of that. If you haven't checked out Race of Sands and you're looking for a good fantasy standalone, I definitely think this one was a really, really fun time. Next up, I feel like this book so frequently comes up when people are talking about genre benders, when people are talking about books that do things differently, and that would be Gideon the Ninth. There's so much about this book that is unlike other things. First off, the way that I would quickly summarize the plot is that it's kind of like an escape room murder mystery in space with necromancers. That's a general overview of what you're going to get. But I also feel like even the writing and the tone of the story aren't quite like a lot of the other things that I've picked up. So, for example, with the writing is quite good. At times, the descriptions are exquisite, and the writing is very lush, and then a character says something so dumb. And the juxtaposition continuously, to me, is kind of like the gold standard for when I want something that the balance is just perfect between brilliant and stupid. It meshes those really, really well. And I also think even the characters represent that, because Gideon is the main character of the story, the titular character, Gideon the Ninth, and she is kind of just like this tough character that's not too concerned with figuring things out. She's just gonna kind of do her thing and follow along until she can have a little bit more agency and freedom. And I would describe Gideon as a bit of a himbo. I love Gideon. I think she's so funny. When people talk about Gideon before, I was like, oh, I'll see. And then I picked up the book and I'm like, I get it. I get why everybody loves Gideon. And she's just a lovable character. But even she, as this character that is kind of, in the way I was describing the writing, as sometimes there's things that are exquisite and there's things that are just purely stupid, Gideon is like kind of fitting also a little bit over here, and then this character that she butts heads with all the time kind of fits over here. So I feel like the characters themselves are almost representations of the juxtaposition of the writing, which is really, really fun. And also, I've never come across a story that I can describe in the same way I described Gideon the Ninth. It's just unlike anything else I've ever picked up, and it was so much fun, and it's truly not the easiest thing to pin down through tropes, and I wouldn't want it to be anyway, because I don't think it's trying to be, and I don't think that it's concerned with being trendy. Part of what makes it so great is that it's so different from so many other things. After that, we have one that I praise very consistently for being very, very unique, and also whenever I bring it up, I have the hardest time giving a good description of it, and that would be The Winnowing Flame by Jen Williams. I should elaborate and say that I often feel like the descriptions I give, or the overview or the synopsis that I give, is serviceable, but it barely scratches the surface. And I am going to end up doing that same thing today. I'll give you an overview of it, but then I'm also kind of trying to say it's really more than just that. So the overview is that you have this sci-epic fantasy world where years and years ago, there were wars that came to this planet, and none of the human beings alive now know what that threat was. They just know it came back continuously and there are remnants of it. And we have a human character in the story who is trying to basically be almost like an archaeologist and determine what occurred, because they just have this bad feeling that something else might come again. And then you have a character that is a part of a race of beings known as Aborans, and the Aborans did know the secrets of the past because they lived very, very long lives. However, the Aborans have essentially died out, and this particular Aboran that is one of our perspectives, he does not have that knowledge because he is actually on the younger side for his race of people. And so he's not able to say from an experienced lens what the threats were, but he thinks maybe there's a chance that he could just go out and live the rest of his life, at least a little bit, and maybe he has something through the knowledge of his people at the very least that might end up working alongside the human character. And then there's this witch character that shows up, and then there's some other characters that show up too. And there's also a whole plot line with why the humans and the Aborans didn't really align and why they didn't get along. And there's this almost elf/vampire aspect to the Aborans, and the witches are just doing their own thing, and how this sort of sci-fi elements play into the story are really, really weird and different, and it's just so lush, and there's so much to it, and there's so much lore, while also having these aggravating yet lovable characters within it. And it's also just a trilogy. I think a lot of times really, really big epic fantasy works like this, they can just go on and on and on and on, and it's kind of refreshing to have an epic fantasy that's just 3 books and is also so unique and so different and isn't building off of any familiar framework. But I can't imagine that thing I described before, that framework of here's a picture of a book's cover and then here are the tropes that you get within it. I can't imagine trying to do that for this book. I guess you would be like witches, vampire elves, lore. I don't know what you would say that would work for that whatsoever. And I think that's exciting. I think it's really cool when there are books that you just have no idea how you could possibly quickly and concisely convey what the book has to offer. Next up is a book that I have admitted many a time did not work for me, but I know it really resonates with a lot of people, and that would be Piranesi. And within this story, you can't even really say all that much because part of the point is to go in not really knowing a whole lot and then just allowing for the experience that this book has to offer. But you see somebody who is living within a place and they are getting to know this environment a little bit more, and you are alongside them questioning, is this real? Is this in their mind? Are they in danger? What's going on? And even though it didn't necessarily work for me, because I think the thematic elements that I pulled from this, they didn't quite resonate with me like they do a lot of other people. However, I really feel it's important to commend this book for being unlike anything I have ever picked up, and it truly is an experience. You're reading it just so sucked in, and the writing style also, I think, plays a role in that feeling of disorientation, which I think is great, and a feat, certainly. After that, we have Birth of a Dynasty. This is a new fantasy release from 2025. It is an exceptionally underhyped fantasy release. And when I did an in-depth non-spoiler review for this, a lot of the focus of the review was the fact that this story, it almost feels like the whole first book, because it is the first book of a series, it almost feels like this whole first book is a long prologue, which sounds off-putting, I think, likely. However, I actually viewed it as a positive because I really like that in this, kind of snappy, quick, trendy type of means of publishing. People even describe publishing as almost like fast fashion these days. So in this space that we are currently finding ourselves in within fantasy or just books in general, to have a book that is not concerned with getting somewhere quickly, but rather it's more focused on the building of the story, I think that's so exciting, because a lot of times the worlds that I get the most lost in, or the stories that I find I continuously want to come back to, are the ones that take their time to really build and build and build. And this is why even certain books where first installments maybe don't have that much of an impact, but I see something in them that I think I have a feeling that this is going to go somewhere and do something great, I will come back to those, because sometimes there's just certain stories where you have to allow for them to breathe and give them time. And I think that's really true of this one. And I think it speaks to the fact that we feel almost like there's a shortage these days, with fantasy anyway, of those more epic sorts of stories. So to see a new one coming out that has more of the ingredients of that is really, really exciting. You follow these two perspectives, as well as many others that are somewhat related to these two. But you follow these two perspectives, one who is from a clan that was slaughtered, and one whose clan is very much in danger, and through some prophecy is actually related to, in some fashion, the things that are going on with the clan that was basically wiped out. So you have the last remaining member who's in hiding, as well as somebody who is in plain sight, but is doing everything they can to survive. And you're just kind of watching the way these characters' lives unfold, and you're wondering how they're going to connect, while also trying to figure out why these two children are so significant to all these other adults surrounding them. And there's a lot of lore, and there's a lot of intrigue, and there's a lot of political maneuverings, and it was really, really great. Highly recommend, but is not easy to give a brief and succinct description for. And then last for today, we have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I will say there is a very quick way for this book to get my attention, which is basically to say, what if Brandon Sanderson wrote a Final Fantasy X adjacent story? And that's basically what this is. And you better believe, because I find a way to mention Final Fantasy X far too often on this channel, that's all I really need to know about that book. But I read it and I really liked it, and it was so different from not only a lot of other things that Sanderson has written, but it's very different from a lot of what we get in fantasy regardless. So you have these two perspectives, one of whom lives in what feels almost like this futuristic sci-fantasy setting, and the other one that feels like they live in a very rural and lacking in progress and technology and technological innovations. It feels like they live in this kind of bleak setting that there's not a whole lot to. And somehow these characters end up in each other's worlds, on their planets, in their times. You don't really know exactly what the difference is in their settings, but you can clearly tell that they are indeed different. And they are trying to figure out how they ended up in each other's plot lines. And also, in the meantime, they're getting to know and care for one another, and they're trying to work together to work everything out. But I feel like the magic is very different from a lot of other stories. I think that there are certain pieces to this one that feel familiar in certain ways, but if you were to do the classic trope marketing, that it would do almost, I think, a disservice to the uniqueness of this story, because it is more than just a, portal type of fantasy. It's more than just a swapping type of story. It really is doing a lot more with that. And there's a lot of little mysteries along the way. And it takes its time to kind of have slow and cute character building and character relationship building, which I also quite enjoyed. So Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, I think since Sanderson's Secret Projects, I almost feel like it's kind of gotten a little bit lost. We talk about Tress a lot, and we talk about, obviously, Stormlight Archive, because the 5th book came out in that series after Yumi, and Sanderson has written other things, and of course there's Mistborn, and more people are getting into Cosmere now, and I just kind of feel like Yumi ends up off to the side. Also, not Cosmere, but the Rithmatist. That one is so fun. I really need him to write the sequel to that. I saw I recently, like many of us, saw the announcement that Sanderson is going to write this other series, and a little bit I was like, can you finish the Rithmatist? I want authors to go where their passions are, but at the same time, I'm like, I really want the sequel to the Rithmatist. And the Rithmatist, I always kind of jokingly, but seriously say it's like a story of chalk monster drawing, which is not inaccurate if you give that one a try, but it's a lot younger, and it's really, really fun, and it's really different. But because Yumi I described as being kind of this one that I feel like gets off to the side, the Rithmatist definitely, that's true of as well. But both of those are very, very fun and don't necessarily fit within a lot of tropes. As mentioned at the beginning, I would absolutely love to know what's a book that you feel like it's not reinventing the wheel, it uses a lot of tropes, but you just feel like it does it so well that you don't even care. And then what's something that you feel like you have no idea ever how to describe, and you're just kind of saying, hey, trust me, bro, it's really good. I would love to know your recommendations for both of those categories. Also, if you're interested in hearing any more about these books, if I have in-depth reviews or discussions, I'll have those linked, and I'll have the books themselves linked as well in case you would like to check them out. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.